All right, everyone. So again, thanks for joining. The focus of today's webinar is about omnichannel customer experience and how a CDP like mParticle can help empower that customer journey and improve the variety of touch points that customers are now getting with a variety of brands. So our agenda for today is just an introduction to the mParticle CDP, followed by some customer stories and general use cases from how we see omnichannel data being used, and then rounding it off with a demo to actually show you what that looks like. So we'll start with the mParticle CDP introduction. With the many different types of input properties that consumer brands are using nowadays, whether it be mobile, web, or offline, data stewardship pretty much becomes pretty hard. And the reason being is because a lot of this data is coming from different input properties, as I mentioned, that are owned by different teams that are pretty much speaking different languages. Reconciling that data across different silos is obviously very complex. And of course, everybody's busy, so it's really hard to coordinate those efforts. This pretty much results in obviously this messy, unreliable, and unusable data that everyone knows exists, but it's really hard to get kind of a common language around. So the reality becomes, hey, we have a lot of these great purpose-built tools, right, ranging from analytics to marketing automation, and we need to get the data from these variety of sources into those tools. And while the tools are phenomenal, if you give them siloed data that doesn't really talk to each other, you end up devaluing those tools just by virtue of not having the data centralized in the first place. So we usually end up in the enterprise space with a picture that looks sort of like this, where there's all kinds of different kind of internal tools and backend systems trying to feed into a variety of different properties and then forwarding out to all of these different purpose-built tools. What people are trying to achieve is more of a data supply chain that looks like this, where the collection can happen across a variety of different properties. It can be standardized, which is kind of the key to all this. And once standardized and centralized, we can have some control over it and then be able to connect it downstream to wherever it needs to go. That's where mParticle will come in and be at the center and more of a data infrastructure layer of all of this different data. CDP, of course, allows you to centralize this data so the controlling and unification can happen all in real time across a variety of different properties, and then forward it out to different tools that matter to the business. I'm going to pause here if there are any questions on the line. Okay. Moving on is, let's see how some customers are kind of using mParticle to achieve this North Star of data centralization and federation. So we are trusted by some of the world's largest brands across a host of different verticals, as you can see, ranging from e-com, retail, on-demand services, QSR. We kind of run the gamut here. And a lot of these brands are obviously very successful in their industries, and they're trusting us to ensure that their customer experiences can be real-time, contextual, and very kind of personal and one-to-one. This next slide shows that a CRM use case now and a customer journey is not really linear anymore. It's not start and end on the same device. So what this slide is showing is across the top, you have what the customer is actually experiencing. So going through this, right, they come into a physical store, let's say, they browse around, maybe they make a purchase, and then they'll receive some emails afterwards that maybe entice them to go back into the store or place an online order and then go pick it up. But what's happening on the back end nowadays with the CDP is that we're collecting all this data that's coming in between. So we know granularly that, hey, this specific item was purchased in a store, and then they were put into an audience segmentation for certain targeting. Up till that point, the user has just made the purchase. Now they get the engagement side of the house. And once they get the engagement side of the house, it can trigger them to further their customer journey back into a different channel. So in mobile, in this case, once that mobile order comes in, that information is again reconciled to that same user, And then if they come back in, we can utilize location data, for example, to understand when they came in to the store and picked up that second order. So taking a step back from this, it really lends itself to show that the specific digital properties by themselves are not going to be enough to make sure that the customer has the most tailored experience. Any questions here before I move on? Great. So this, pretty much brings us to the demo. We wanted to really go through those slides pretty concisely because we feel like that the value is going to be showing you the platform itself and putting this into practice. So I'm going to switch over right now and get into the mParticle platform. And while I'm doing this, anybody's, feel free to jump in, ask questions, more than happy to answer them. All right, so first we're going to start with our directory in the mParticle platform. We talked about the fact that the goal of all this multi-channel user data is to get that data to the downstream tools that matter to your business. So starting there is, hey, where do I want to send my data? mParticle is a marketer-friendly focused tool that empowers them to essentially manage data flows and integrations to a host of tools without having to worry about engineering resources in the mix. So in this specific example, we can go in, simply search a service such as Google Analytics, go ahead and view the Google Analytics page. And because Google Analytics has a different way of authenticating than, let's say, Amplitude, we on the mParticle side have made sure it's super easy for anybody to go in and add it. So adding Google Analytics is as simple as a few clicks. Simply give it a configuration name. You give it the specific tracking ID that might be pertinent to that specific instance, and then you can go ahead and add the connection. Once that's done, you can make that connection directly to any of the input sources that are feeding your CDP. So in this case, you see that on the left of the screen, we have iOS, Android, web, OTT, kind of the typical digital platforms that most businesses use. On the right side, we actually have some feed integrations is what we call it. So this is essentially data that's coming in from our partners that can help further enrich any user profiles. So a very simple use case is we may be able to connect to an email service provider. We can send signals to that provider to either fire off an email that's part of a campaign due to a recent purchase. But then the email service provider can also send us a signal back telling us, hey, by the way, the email has been sent, the email has been opened, and it can provide any other metrics that it's collecting as well. This way, that centralized user profile can be further enriched with even downstream tool information, allowing you to kind of complete this full life cycle of customer data. Coming in, we can go ahead and click into iOS, let's say, for example, and see exactly what downstream tools iOS data is flowing to. And if we pause here, each one of these squares essentially entails an SDK or an integration effort that did not have to be dealt with by an engineering team or a large collective effort. This could have been simply added via point and click. So the Google Analytics integration that I just added to the configuration can be found here. Let's simply select it and then add it to the connection screen. As soon as I add it, we will be able to go ahead and start forwarding data in real time. Now, what kind of data are we collecting? The great thing about our CDP is that there is a variety of ways to bring data in, whether it be native SDKs or server-to-server APIs. So that brings us to Data Master. Regardless of where that data came from, it's going to abide by a certain data model, and it'll be very easy for anybody to find. So we come here, we can see some custom events. So in this case, add to cart. We can click into add to cart and understand exactly what this event is doing, regardless of what input source it came from. So this specific event, for example, came in from Android and iOS. We have further information about the attributes, and it really helps teams understand exactly what piece of data is being collected and why. This goes back to the first point we made where there's multiple teams usually working on siloed customer data, and having it centralized really makes it easy for multiple teams to come in, collaborate, and be on the same page. Let's hop back into the connections area and look at filters. Because of the fact that we are collecting all this data in one central location, it makes it extremely easy to control and govern where that data goes and how it gets there. So in this specific case, I have a few different partners or integration partners lined up, and it's super easy for a marketer to go in and simply flip a switch if they decide they don't want to send data to a certain tool. And this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be simply to control volumes going down to certain tools, but it could also be from just the fact that you don't want to send, navigation data to Radar, which is a location service provider. You might not want to send site searching information to Mixpanel. And doing that, again, simply by flipping a switch, is significantly easier than days of old when you would have to go in and make some manual changes to a potential individual SDK. We talked a lot about the data coming in and the data going out, and always tied to one single user. That allows us to segment users very granularly based on their attributes and behaviors, which brings me to my audience tool. So the audience builder tool is a very easy way for marketers, anybody to come in and create an audience segment that can be updated and maintained in real time. So let's take this audience, for example. This is an audience of users who have made a recent purchase, perhaps in the category of jackets or outerwear, between the ages of 20 and 30, and may have shared something about us on social media through the application. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward to create the criteria and then segment down. This, again, relieves engineering efforts of querying a stale user table and waiting for a long turnaround time. All of this can be created and activated in real time. Every single criteria can be controlled and split by and, or, and exclude logic, making it very easy to control and then connect downstream. Once connected, it's very similar to how we saw the input sources connect to downstream tools. All you have to do is go ahead, choose a service you want, and the data will then in real time be forwarded to all of these tools as necessary. Now, one thing I like to point out is it's not just that we are sending a list of users at a certain time to Facebook or to Braze. What we are doing is we are creating that list in those tools. We are maintaining those lists in those tools in real time as well. So as soon as a user qualifies in or out of a segment, they are pulled not only from the mParticle list, but any downstream tool that is being forwarded to. And that is arguably, being pulled off of a list is arguably just as important as being put in a list. There are so many situations where people make a purchase and they will get a reminder to complete their purchase, several hours later, due to the fact that a lot of, audience building processes, rely on flat files or multiple different tools that are not synced up. The great thing here is as soon as it's pulled off from one of the sources, in this case mParticle, it's pulled off from the rest of them. We now have talked about the data coming in, the data going out, and how we can segment upon individual users, specifically because mParticle is a real-time and fully deterministic platform. That leads us to our user activity view. So every user in mParticle will essentially get a page like this and have all of their information tied in a one-to-one fashion. Because mParticle is deterministic, it means that we are always guaranteed to know exactly who they are, but we also can track them whether they're anonymous or known. So as users start to interact with an application or a website, the first thing that mParticle does is assign an mParticle ID. This is the way we can track them regardless of any given user identifier. This is obviously automatically generated and handled by the system. As the user interacts with the application and logs in, perhaps provide some information, we can then collect information such as email address, which can tie back to customer IDs, or even social handles across Twitter, Facebook, and any other type of identifier you'd like. Scrolling down, we can see that the different inputs that this user has been a part of. So in this specific case, they have been a part of they've been on the iOS application, the website, and maybe a Roku application. And then adjacent to that, we see a partner feed list. Here is where a lot of our customers can leverage the agnostic style of data that we can handle. So they take in a lot of different types of tools, whether it's backend or productized tool with machine learning or predictive analytics. They can feed that data into mParticle and then further enrich it, similar to how those partner feeds can further enrich the same data. Coming down, we can take a look at all the user attributes that have been collected along the way as well. And pausing here, I'd like to point out that user attributes, user identities, and any of the event behavior that's been captured up until this point is fair game to use in segmentation. So we understand that any piece of data is going to be very valuable for consumer brands to hone in on in order to make sure that they understand exactly who their customers are, allowing them to engage with them with the right message, the right context at the right time. Moving down further, we can see the audience membership that this user is a part of. So in this case, it's a few of those audiences that we looked at earlier. And it allows us to kind of tell a story about this customer pretty quickly. Hey, they're a high LTV user. They've bought a recent purchase of jackets and outerwear, similar to that audience that I mentioned earlier. They are a low churn risk. Maybe that came in, if you can see, from a propensity scoring tool. And it seems like their favorite store is in New York. All of this really allows you to get to that one-to-one hyper-personalization North Star of engagement with your customers. Now, collecting all this information is great, but privacy and security has always been at the forefront of how mParticle was founded and built. So we also have a consent API built into all of our SDKs and our APIs. This way, whenever consent is being collected from applications or websites, again, since we're tying it directly to each individual user, that can be tied to the user and then used to handle data forwarding down to any different tools. So this could be blanket statemented saying, do not forward to my location provider if location analytics consent has not been given. This, again, really allows you to get one-stop shop, not only for collecting and centralizing data, but also for the governance of it as well. This concludes the main overview of the mParticle platform, and I wanted to get into a specific use case as well, since this is an omni-channel data webinar. But before I do that, I wanted to make sure and see if there are any questions on the line. All right, so we're going to shift over to another instance here. I have a sample app that's spun up here. And I just kind of wanted to show you how the real-time data is captured and what kind of data we can use to leverage with communication and engagement. As I click around, you'll definitely notice that sorry, I realized this is paused. It's not a webinar without technical difficulties. There we go. As I click around, what'll happen is data will start flowing into the mParticle platform. And it's not just the event information, but it's also user attributes or any other type of useful information we can have. As we add items to an order, let's say that data comes in and we can understand exactly what type of items were added, and then a purchase can be made. Once a purchase is made, not only are we collecting the data that came in, but we are actually sending that data out in real time to different connected tools. So if we can see here, every piece of information that I collected so far has been forwarded to Iterable in this case. I made a purchase that was forwarded to Iterable, and Iterable has a campaign waiting asking, hey, whenever there's a purchase made, I need to send an email. So if we bounce over here, we get a purchase confirmation that was sent in real time within milliseconds down to the user. And again, this was all controlled by the mParticle platform without having to worry about multiple SDKs and large amounts of code maintenance. Now, that's a pretty traditional way of getting app data from applications or websites down to different downstream tools. But again, we have other sources of data, as I mentioned earlier, since the journey is no longer linear, right? We have location data or offline data. So let's go ahead and see how that looks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually simulate a location change on this device to a custom location. We'll go ahead and make that change, and we'll see that that gets updated here. We're now here in San Francisco. I'm going to go back to the application, and what we'll see is that Radar has now told me, hey, the user has entered a specific geofence. And that's great because that happened in real time. You also see that Iterable has also told me an email has been sent. So what we just connected here was our native application to the Radar location service provider down to our ESP, so in this case, Iterable. That connection itself, again, made in a very, very easy point and click fashion. So we can, again, go back here to the email, and we just got a little promo email, enticing users to come into the store for a 20% off purchase. These are the types of messaging that will really help consumer brands get their users where they need to be based on their behaviors. All of these different types of interactions, again, can be controlled by the user behaviors, the attributes, and many more. So I know this was a very quick and simple example, but it just kind of shows you the variety of ways we can leverage the data that's already there in order to really increase this ever-changing need for one-on-one personalized engagement. Going back here, that concludes the actual demo of the mParticle platform that I wanted to show everyone. And would love to open it up for any questions that might be on the line. And if not, really appreciate everyone joining today. Would love to stay in touch. You have my information here. And if there are any other questions or specific use cases you guys have questions about, please feel free to reach out. Again, really appreciate you guys taking the time today to learn more about mParticle, and I hope this was a great educational session for everyone.